Hello, this is Susan Steele Mulholland, and welcome to this edition of Art Beat. The current exhibit at the James A. Michener Art Center includes American Indian portraits, photographs by Edward Sheriff Curtis. E.S. Curtis was born in 1868. For a period of 30 years, from 1898 to 1928, he devoted himself to learning and recording the ways of Indians as they were before the encroachment of the forces of change. Through sacrifice and dogged pursuit, he was admitted to secret societies, instructed in ancient legends, and entrusted with timeless truths. He developed a view of the Indian unapproached by any other photographer. In this photograph, we see the sensitive portrayal of a young Indian chief. Curtis saw and felt the richness of Indian culture and mourned its loss. Filled with a sense of openness and trust, his portraits give us at least a glimpse into the rich inner life of the complex people. Such moving images could not have happened without the full cooperation of the subjects. The technical problems Curtis faced were enormous: bulky cameras that used heavy glass plates, an Edison sound recorder, and miscellaneous darkroom equipment had to be transported in wagons and by train. On more than one occasion, he was shot at, and once in Arizona, a flood destroyed hundreds of negatives, which ruined months of work. Curtis tells us through his extensive notes that rushes gathered in the swamps and in the shallows of the lakes were dried and strung together into mats, which primitively were used for lodge covers, mattresses, canoe cushions, and for a variety of domestic purposes. This quote from Curtis describes his impressions when taking this photograph. Quote, "It would be difficult to conceive of a more thorough aboriginal than this Mojave girl. Her eyes are those of the fawn of the forest, questioning the strange things of civilization upon which it gazes for the first time." The Navajo were sometimes nomadic, herding flocks of sheep primarily for the wool used by women to weave rugs. Navajo men were excellent silversmiths. Curtis says about this photograph, "In the early morning, this boy, as if springing from the earth itself, came to my desert camp. Indeed, he seemed a part of the very desert. His eyes bespeak all the curiosity, all the wonder of his primitive mind, striving to grasp the meaning of the strange things about him." This picture was made in the heart of the Badlands of South Dakota. The subject is the sub-chief Red Hawk. He was born in 1854. His first war party was in 1865 under Crazy Horse against the troops. He was engaged in 20 battles, many with troops, among them the Custer Fight of 1876. Intellectually, culturally, and physically, these Indians were the leaders among the Aborigines of the Columbia River Basin. They made a marked impression on explorers, traders, missionaries, and army officers. Every visitor at East Mesa knows Nampeo, the potter of Hanol, whose creations excel those of any rival. Strangers wander into her house, welcome though unbidden. But Nampeo only works and smiles. So says Curtis of this artistic study of a woman painting her pottery. In this tender portrait of a mother and child, we see the richness of tone made possible by the use of the finest printing process, the photogravure. This involved the etching with ferric acid of a sheet of copper to which had been attached a gelatin tissue that had first been exposed to light and then developed. The resulting copper plate was carefully inked and printed on a blank sheet of paper in a printing press. Photogravures were prized for their delicacy and rich tonal range. The images in this exhibition are primarily photogravures taken from both the volumes and the portfolios of the North American Indian in the collections of the Philadelphia Museum of Art Omaha Steaks International, and private lenders. Viewers should remember that Curtis's view of the Indians was highly personal and represents no more or no less than one man's vision of the beauty and tragedy of a dying way of life.
One of the great things about art is that people love it and they hate it. And it's great to come in and say, I think that piece of art is wonderful, or I think that piece of sculpture is ridiculous. I mean,
Bruce Katsiff is the energetic and expressive, newly appointed director of the James A. Michener Arts Center in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. He is also a fine arts photographer and is the one responsible for obtaining the loan of the Curtis photographs which we just saw. Bruce's own photographs have been exhibited in China and England, as well as at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, the Allentown Art Museum, and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. They are now on display at the Hicks Art Center at the Bucks County Community College.
This year, 1989, or this past year, was the 150th anniversary of the invention of photography by Mr. Niepce and Mr. Daguerre and Henry Fox Talbot, the English and French photographic inventors. And photography is celebrating 150 years. And of course, photography has had a struggle for recognition as an art form, in part because it's so accessible. Everyone makes pictures. Photographs are the only remaining folk art that's left, okay? Everyone has a camera, everyone makes pictures. And for so many years, there was this association that in order for something to be art, it had to represent a kind of skill that I couldn't do. And that was one of the criteria for establishing that something was art. And because photography was accessible and other people could do it, the assumption was, oh, well, that's not art. Anyone can do it. I don't really much subscribe to that whole thinking, because I think art has more to do with ideas and communication. Skill is a factor, but it's not the only issue. I first started taking photographs when I was in high school. And like so many other young people, I was fascinated with a camera and built a little darkroom in the basement and started to make photographs. And fairly quickly, I started to get reasonably serious about this activity. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I began to talk to my parents about the idea that I wanted to go to college and study photography. And my parents are wonderful people, but of course their response to that was, you're not going to study photography. That's a waste of time. You have to do an acceptable profession. So I was young and impressionable and decided that I would go and study pre-law. And I went to school for about a year and a half and decided, this isn't really what I want to do. I want to study photography. So I decided I'll go to school and study photography, and my parents said, well, fine, you're going to have to fund your own way through school. And I was young and even more arrogant than I am now at times, so decided, fine, I will pay my own way, and I went to school. It's not an uncommon experience. Very often when people tell their parents they want to study art or they want to study photography, that's a difficult one for parents to accept, because they believe, obviously, somehow their child will grow up and starve. And that's rarely the case. America's a rich country, and most people can find their way working in the arts. Photography, of course, has had a struggle for recognition. There are even today some folks who will debate, is photography art, isn't photography art? I'm really not so interested in that argument. It's an old argument that's been going on for about 100 years. As far as I'm concerned, photography can be art. It depends upon who's making the pictures. It depends upon whether or not they're communicating effectively with us. My own photographs are sometimes very disturbing to people. For about years now, I've been photographing subject matter which some people find very distressing. I don't think of my objects as ugly. I think of them as wonderful, and I think that they kind of hint at the mystery of life underneath. And it all started very innocently. One day I live in the country, up in Solebury Township, and one day I was taking a walk in the woods and I discovered a dead deer that was slowly melting into the earth. and I started to photograph the deer as it slowly disappeared, as it decayed. And I became fascinated with the subject matter, and soon I started to collect objects that I found, and I was quickly unhappy photographing them where I found them, so I would bring them into my studio and build and construct images. There's a word that's used today to describe that style of photography. It's called directorial photography. And the idea being that the photographer will work in some ways as a painter did, where instead of my bringing my camera to the subject matter, and capturing the world as I find it, I bring my subject matter to my studio. My camera is almost as if it's a canvas, and I position the objects in the canvas and look at them. And I think one of the first photographs that you're looking at, which is titled The Golden Section, represents an example of this kind of work. The objects represented are varied. There's a skull of a Saint Bernard, there's a skull of a deer, there's another skull of a raccoon, and I will organize and structure the space in order to try to establish deep Renaissance space, and to try to say to you that if we can get past some of the cultural barriers which have taught us that these objects are supposed to be ugly and horrendous, and look at them for what they are without our fear that we bring with them, the objects themselves are beautiful. They're as gorgeous as any flower, they're as gorgeous as any other object, and I'm intrigued by the fact that that these are objects that really aren't born until the death of their host. They're always there. They're always hidden under the surface. Underneath this flesh, there's a skull. Underneath it, there are bones. And these are really beautiful objects too. So I've been photographing these now for some time. I'm pleased. This image of the Golden Section traveled to China in a recent exhibition, and I just closed an exhibition in the Morris Gallery at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, a two-person exhibit with another photographer, Susan Fenton, who also works in this directorial mode of building and constructing images to photograph. This second picture that we're looking at is titled Shadow, Light, and Birth. And it's drawn from a variety of inspirations. It, in part, comes from some of the medieval images where there is an above world, a middle world, and then purgatory down below. And if we look at this picture in the top portion, we see this pelvis, which I am using really as a kind of face. And it's really watching this whole scene. Then in the middle, there are forms that represent both male and female forms. And finally, as we move to the bottom, we see this skull that is kind of being born through this oval form, which represents a kind of birth canal or a womb. On either side of the image, we see these empty columns. This is also very similar to the Mexican Week of the Dead, when there's a celebration for bones and a celebration for death. So this image is drawn from a variety of inspirations, and it has a kind of narrative content to it. The next photograph that we're looking at, which is titled Because I Do Not Hope to Turn, hints at some very fearful elements. In the lower right-hand corner of the photograph, there is a form that almost looks as if it's a fetus. In truth, it isn't. It's actually the remnant of a cat that I have placed in some ash and other such material so that it looks almost as if it's a deer, and it kind of hides and lurks there in the distance. And then the large skull that you see is a Saint Bernard's image. As we move over, there's another dog skull. And this is an image where I'm trying to, again, think about some of the fear and the mystery that we have about life and death, and the concern about what will occur after life. In this last photograph, again, you see that I'm working with something called the golden section. The golden section is a Greek idea, and it's a belief in magic numbers. The Greeks believed that certain proportions had special significance. And in fact, the Parthenon is built in a golden section. Well, I had been working in this format for some time when I discovered that these dimensions, 12 by 20, are actually a golden section rectangle. And one of the ways that I structure and organize these pictures, and I know it's a little hard to see this on television because you don't get to see the whole picture at once. We're panning around it. But I try to organize and build these images and structure them around the golden section or the golden rectangle. All of these photographs are platinum prints. And that's a process that's very old. It goes back to the 19th century. It was invented by a gentleman by the name of William Willis, who was a member of the Royal Photographic Society, and in 1858 he suggested the platinum process because it would be a more permanent photographic process. There was a committee of the Royal Photographic Society. It's my favorite title for a committee. It was called the Fading Committee. And the Fading Committee was supposed to deal with the problem that photographs faded and was supposed to come up with a process that would be more permanent. So Mr. Willis suggested the use of platinum instead of silver for the photographic process because platinum is a more noble metal. And in these prints, I actually hand coat this emulsion myself. I feel like a chemist, and you get a couple drops of this and a couple drops of that, and you spread it out on a piece of drawing paper and brush it out, and that's what gives these prints this feel as if they're an etching. And because platinum is not light sensitive, you use a catalyst that is light sensitive to help create the image. Some people are also interested with the fact that these are contact prints. These pictures are all 12 inches by 20 inches, and if I had the negatives here for you to see, you would see that the negatives are the same size as these prints. I work with an old camera from around 1910 that was a banquet camera. It was used to make the large banquet photographs. And these pictures are very permanent because the only thing that's here is the paper, which is 100% cotton, and the black is pure platinum, which is a very stable metal. A platinum print will last for thousands of years as long as no one tears it up or it isn't attacked by mold or it doesn't get wet. Artists are always struggling with the preservation of paper objects. Recently, I took over the job of director of the James A. Michener Art Center. And that's a bit of a transition for me because it takes away some time from doing my own art, although it does offer me some income and helps me to pay the bills and support my family. It's not an unusual tradition, though, for artists to be involved in museums. Actually, the first museum in America was founded by an artist, Charles Willson Peale. And most of us know Charles Willson Peale because we've seen the portrait of George Washington or portraits of Benjamin Franklin that Charles Willson Peale did. Charles Willson Peale, when he was in his mid-40s, founded the first museum in America, which was at 3rd and Lombard. And he put together a collection of paintings and natural objects and created Peale's Museum. There are other artists who have been worked as museum directors. The artist Walter Baum, for example, who's one of the Pennsylvania Impressionists, also served for many years as director of the Allentown Art Museum. And I don't really want to put myself in his company, but certainly Thomas Eakins was also, who was an artist of some reputation in America, also served as director of the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. So there's some tradition where artists have worked in museums. I think it makes sense. It's more part of the older tradition when artists were more actively integrated into the life of the community. In Philadelphia, for example, when the city was founded, there were many artists who participated in the decision-making about the city planning and the way the city would be laid out. Maybe some of our cities would work a little better today if there were more artists involved in decision-making roles instead of others making those decisions. Sometimes folks don't respect artists, and they somehow have this image of artists as wild or crazy, and that's really not been my experience. Artists are often very thoughtful and serious and try to solve problems in positive ways. So it's not so crazy for me as an artist to try and take my hand at serving here in Doylestown as director of the James A. Michener Art Center. one of the important jobs that I have here at the James A. Michener Art Center is to help to define the role of this center and to build a first quality regional museum here in Bucks County. There has been, over the last 20 years, an increasing regionalization of the arts. Believe it or not, there are now over 110 opera companies in America. Regional theater has become wonderfully vital and alive, and there's been an enormous growth in regional museums. People still go to the major metropolitan centers, but they also want an opportunity for cultural experiences near their homes, near where they live. And we all know there's been increasing growth outside of cities in America. We believe Bucks County deserves a first-class regional museum. We have a splendid artistic tradition in this community that goes back to Edward Hicks and Martin Johnson Heed and a great number of really superb artists who have lived in the county and continue to live in the county. And we have a strong belief that there are the resources and the interest for this county to support the best quality regional museum, and that's what we're going to hope to do over the next number of years.
In June of 1990, we attended an art auction at the Bucks County Vineyards in New Hope, Pennsylvania. The atmosphere was charged with excitement and energy. There was lively, loud conversation as patrons sipped wine and perused the work of over 30 artists who wore red carnations and nervously awaited the fate of their donations. The auction was sponsored by a newly formed group of artists and the National Organization for Women.
About 2 years ago, I made a personal decision to get involved as an activist in the pro-choice movement. After the first Washington March in 1989, I found that there was a need in the Bucks County organizations for support materials like the banners that you see hanging here tonight. So I got together a few friends and called a few artists and started Artists for Choice Today. That was the beginning of what is happening here tonight. But I decided that I wanted to do more, and since I wasn't in a position to give money, and a lot of my friends who are also artists were in that same position, as we well know, we're not real rich, we decided that what we wanted to do is get together and each donate a piece of art to be auctioned off. And in that idea, this idea for the auction was born. So I got on the telephone and I started cold calling the artists of Bucks County. And these people didn't know who I was or what Artists for Choice Today was, because it was a new organization, but they were so similarly committed to this that they decided to trust me to make this happen. And I think that that is really remarkable, and they should get a big round of applause for that.
NAL is the National Organization for Women. We are the Bucks County chapter of the National Organization for Women, and Bucks County's chapter was established in 1974. And we're especially excited about tonight because this is a fundraising event, and it is unique because we have been able to provoke through our membership a new movement of Artists for Choice Today. And Susan Zune and I have worked together to coordinate this event, so we're very excited.
Well, I know it's taken a lot of time and a lot of work. With this money, what kind of things will NAL be doing?
Well, this specific event mirrors the national movement. We feel that our highest priority today is for fundraising for pro-choice candidates. As you know, ever since the reversal of Roe v. Wade, we have been extremely concerned about women losing their right to choose. And we feel that the best way to ensure that women have their right to choose is to elect candidates who are willing to support that position. So the funds raised tonight, hopefully a whole lot of funds, will go into the campaign chests of many of the legislators in Bucks County who have been courageous enough to come out for Choice for Women today.
How strong is the organization in Bucks County?
National Organization for Women have in the area of 200, 250 members. We have monthly meetings at Wrightstown Friends meeting. We usually draw maybe 20 members who come out, more if there's an educational program. We also host programs such as Your Rights in Your Workplace, and harassment, sexual harassment, things like that, which bring the members out.
Do men come to these meetings also?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And can they be members of NOW?
Yes, absolutely. And we have 3 or 4 who come on a regular basis who are our members.
You realize that the National Organization for Women takes to the streets. We believe in grassroots action. We are the ones who are out there demonstrating and carrying signs, and we board buses, and we go to Washington, and we go to Harrisburg. We try to mobilize people. And somewhere, when the Equal Rights Amendment failed, we said, you know, I think we're doing this all wrong. Here we are petitioning those legislators and saying, oh, please vote the way we want. And we said, hold it. Maybe what we really need to do is get the people in there who already have those values. Why are we trying to change people's minds? It'll never work. So we started to support those people who were supportive of women's rights and pro-choice. And I am very pleased tonight to be able to present to you some of our pro-choice incumbents and candidates who are here this evening. I would like to start with our congressman from the 8th Congressional District, Peter Kosmeyer.
I'm here because choice is an issue across this country, in every state, since the Supreme Court gave the states the power to enact restrictive laws. It's an important issue, and there are people in this community, as there are in communities all across America, fighting for a woman's right to choose. It's something I have been a fighter for ever since going to the Congress in 1976, and wherever that fight is being waged, I'll be there, whether it's on the floor of the Congress or here at home in Bucks County.
I don't know how much you need to be told about auctioning. Basically, if you see the piece, you like it, just get my attention in one form or another, and we'll take the bids. $5, make it $5. $40 bid now, $5, make it $5 now, $5, give me $5 now, $5, make it $5. $40 bid now, $5, make it $5 now, $5, give me $5 now, $5, make it $5. $40 bid now, $5, make it $5 now, $5, give me $5 now, $5, make it $5 now, $5, give me $5. $40 bid now, $5, make it $5.
Artists have used their mediums of expression throughout history to sensitize society. Here in Bucks County, artists give of their talents to help elect those leaders in today's society who can make a difference. Go to the polls in November and vote. This is Susan Mulholland. Good night for Artbeat.
Okay, sold. $40.